I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Amazing FBA, or maybe morning or evening where you are, but welcome back if you're listening in the US of A, where about half the listeners are, and or the UK. I know a lot of you who are watching on YouTube are also US based, so hello USA, good to see you. And this is the place to be if you're a British-based Amazon entrepreneur, but actually an awful lot of people from America seem to be finding value in it as well. So I'm delighted to welcome you. We've also got some people from Germany and India, a sort of small but important minority. So grüß Gott und guten Morgen or good evening, whatever that is. So welcome back. So today we are talking about product selection criteria and filtering out the bad things. And I would basically start at this point giving things a number. So if I've got a product idea such as silicone spatula, I would start saying, okay, so the demand is there, which we talked about last time. The demand depth is good, great. Now let me look at the competition. So the first thing I would do, which links with demand depth, is to look for brand dominance as well. So if you, for example, are selling silicone spatulas and there is Russell Hobbs, I know they make kettles. I'm not a great person for buying cookware stuff, but you know, if you're selling kettles, for example, and you look at the demand for electric kettle on page 1 of Amazon.com, and you see that there are $30,000 worth a month of sales being made, you might think that's fantastic. But then if you look at the first 2 sellers and the first 2 positions, the first 2 products that are selling, and you discover that they are between them selling about $15,000 a month, that's more disappointing. If you further discover that both of those products are sold by the same brand, like Russell Hobbs or whatever, then that is a big red flag for you. Now, there are 2 different forms of brand dominance which worry me to different degrees on Amazon. The first thing is if somebody like Russell Hobbs or a big household brand that I've heard of, and whichever category it is, you'll have different level of expertise, which is why it's wise to pick a niche that you understand and you personally shop in if you possibly can, because then you can think like a consumer, and that's probably the #1 thing you need to do. But if you see a brand that you personally recognize, that's a red flag. Okay, now that may not mean that you cannot sell a product in that category, but it may well mean that you can't achieve the same prices or the same volume of sales. So you need to look at what is going to be a realistic price. And for me, I would strip those out when I'm looking at the sort of average price that I can get, right? Which is another really important point. The actual price you can get is really important. And again, I want to reiterate, don't go for cheap products. If you have products sort of categories where the price ranges between $10 and $25 and it's $35 for a top brand that is recognized, I personally would be less interested in that category. Now, if I think I can beat the top brand and make an even better product, then maybe I'll consider it. But bear in mind that brand has possibly had decades to build an awareness in consumers' minds. So they are probably going to command a premium in price. So don't go in with optimistic pricing. I think that is probably one of the biggest killers that I've ever seen, particularly working with mentees, which I've been doing since April now. I've seen quite a few people who made choices that kind of would have worked if they hadn't been over optimistic about the price. So this is all starting to link up. You can't neatly divide this up, because if you find a brand dominance, that is going to be a competition thing, but also it gives you a hint about pricing. One other thing about brand dominance is very simply that if you find a private label type brand, i.e. that you and I have never heard of, that is taking up a big percentage of the market, again, that is something to be aware of. You may be able to beat them, but it can often be the case that they will simply lower their prices to beat you. So if you're going to find something like this, you can beat a sort of non-famous brand, but which is taking up a big percentage of the sales. But I think you're only going to do that by really differentiating your product and making it much better. Obviously, clearly, visually, immediately better, folks. Not you claiming that it's the best product in the world. Everyone does that. It has no credibility with the consumer. So don't assume that by simply using the word best or doing some nice photos, you're going to beat people. Now, caveat, that may be true in some marketplaces if they got terrible looking photos and it obviously looks tatty and they're still making sales, then great, okay, you can go in and beat them temporarily with good photos and a reasonable product. But I mean, if that's all you're really differentiating on, then it won't take very long for that to get caught up with by somebody else who's operating in a sort of quick kind of lazy way. So I don't advise that, okay? So in conclusion, brand dominance can be a warning sign. It's not necessarily don't go into this market. It means you've got to assess the situation. If you've got a famous brand that is completely dominating the space and soaking up all the demand, then don't bother. If it's leaving a substantial amount of demand behind, you need to strip those products out of your equations or out of your spreadsheets. And this is the point at which I probably would be using a spreadsheet by now. And just look at what's left and look at the price points. And if the price points are disappointing, I wouldn't go into it. Now, personally, in the USA, I'm probably never going to bother selling something. I'm just restocking a product that's already launched, so I thought I'd be lazy about it. But other than that, that's going to sell for about $20. Other than that, I'm not going forward going to be looking at anything that sells for less than $30 because the pay-per-click costs in America can be just crippling. So I really, my new normal is $30 to $40 upwards, not between 20 and 40, but from 30 and 40 up. That is my suggestion. Now it's up to you. You're going to have higher costs up front potentially, but don't forget this whole MOQ thing with the Chinese. Let's just deal with that briefly. And again, we'll talk about suppliers down the line, but the minimum order quantity is a bit of a myth. For starters, what you're going to get on Alibaba is kind of a BS number. It doesn't really relate to reality. What I think also is that really they just want a minimum amount of money off you. I mean, if my experience, it varies between different suppliers, but if somebody wants a minimum order quantity of 1,000 units for a $2 widget, you can probably negotiate them down to about 500 units of a $2 widget. So they want about £1,000 off you, or $1,000 I should say, which isn't far off £1,000 sadly at the moment, is sadly if you're British. So yeah, that's probably the way to look at it. So you can go in and probably get 10 widgets that cost $100 each, or 500 widgets of $2 each. I mean, it's probably as broad as it's long with that. So don't assume that your product, just because it's going to sell at a higher price point and therefore cost you more in terms of per unit cost, is going to cost you a ton of money up front. Now the truth is you don't know yet, so you need to do a bit of research. So don't get overexcited too early and start digging in great detail on products which aren't promising. So that's the main thing I would say at this point, is elimination is the name of the game. If something is a kind of 5.5 or 6 out of 10 based on demand depth and a brand competition, at that point I would start to just eliminate it, so you don't waste your time going into the detail that you have to do on a promising product. Just get rid of stuff, eliminate before you investigate. That is the main mantra. Next video / podcast, we are going to be looking at assessing the competition in a bit more detail, and then after that I'm afraid it's getting a spreadsheet out and getting some profit and loss calculations done and talking to some suppliers. All to come, folks. Stay tuned. As ever, come back to me with your thoughts and comments and suggestions. amazingfba.com/FB Facebook. And we've got 600 members there now, so waiting to interact with you. I'll be there interacting frequently, answering questions, trying to help out. So get yourself over there. It's a vibrant place to be. In the meantime, good luck, good hunting.